Well, hello and welcome to the Thriving Life podcast, a weekly podcast designed to help you thrive, not just survive challenges of life, leadership, and faith. I'm your host, Nick Asolis, here with Joel today. And we are kind of using these next few weeks of the podcast to kind of dive deeper into our current message series on Sunday mornings, Third Party.
Yep.
If you've missed that, you can check that out at missionaz.org or in the app.
Yep.
But just looking forward, a quick sec before we get into the third party series, we're lining up some really cool content for the fall. We're really looking at ways to provide some added value to you, the listener. So we're talking about possible like more parenting topics, real world like application, marriage stuff, things like that. So just stay tuned. And if you have any ideas or thoughts, feel free to hit us up on social media. If there's something you'd like to hear more of, reach out and let us know. We're all ears for that stuff.
Yeah,
so,
of course.
Let's jump in. Third party.
Yeah. I wore my patriotic shirt today.
I just noticed. I didn't get the memo.
Because, well, I the last 2 weeks, I think some people could paint me as anti-American, which I'm not trying to be. I just, as we've been talking about prioritizing our citizenship as citizens of the kingdom of heaven, I don't think that's serious like many people, but I've been teased. So, there's
Let
truth
there
and
be
jest.
no doubt he's wearing stars and stripes.
And
for those of you listening,
if you want to have a competition, I can sing all the lyrics of Lee Greenwood's "I'm Proud to Be an American."
I mean, we have a few minutes right after.
We won't do that today.
Don't tune out. Don't tune out.
But hey, I know you're going to ask me some questions, but before we jump in, we haven't talked about this, so I want to start with your reaction, thoughts. You're our comm director, so you see all the communication coming in through social media, whatever. Yep. I want to get your thoughts as well as what you're hearing and how people are responding to the series. I'm just, for our listeners, you're kind of a filter for a lot of that stuff. So tell me what you're hearing and what people's responses are and maybe even what their questions or concerns are.
Well, you know this as the comm director, when I first saw that we were doing a political series months ago, whenever it was, I had a series of heart attacks, booked an appointment with my therapist, and just kind of was like,
we discussed that. You said, "Are you sure you want to do this?
Shut this down."
I'm sure I want to do this.
So that being said, personally, I'm really enjoying this series. Obviously, I have a little bit of a different seat because I'm a listener. A Tinder, you're my pastor, but I also get to be on the content team, and so I get to kind of help see these things come to life, and that's been a huge
filter
blessing.
Out the dangerous stuff.
Yeah, well, and like there's a lot of spoiler alert stuff when I'm in a content meeting on Monday. Yeah. By the time Sunday comes around, I've seen the notes and stuff. Not a whole lot, shocks or surprises because I've kind of already kind of been through that. Yep. But that's different with this series. There's something about just the changes and the adjustments, and then hearing you preach it both weeks so far. There's been things that have actually been like for the first time convicting, and it's like I just heard this 6 days ago. Like, why is that clicking with me now? So on a personal level, I love it. I mean, there's
cool.
The language, visiting your position, like that's kind of been something that was a light bulb moment for me years ago, and
I got that from you. I've that's the first place I've heard it. I know a lot of people around here use it, but that's the first time I heard it was.
It was a college class, and it was actually like a history class, like a 300 level history class, and a textbook for the year. This is probably way off topic, but the textbook for the year was all about all these major world conflicts and battles that we've never heard about because the conflict was resolved before the guns came out. And the recurring theme and one of the conclusions that the author draws, and like what just stuck with me about this class was for people's ability, and he used language to visit their opponent's position. And when they were able to, and he kind of highlights, I've tried to find this book, and it was, 20 years ago, and I haven't been able to find it. I can't remember what the title was. Yeah. Obviously, I don't still have my college textbooks, all these years later. But
I do, but it's not been as long for me since college.
Well, and you have seminary. You have to hang on to those. So that it just stuck with me. Just not only as a learner and somebody who kind of likes history, but just on an individual level. In this Arizona State University history class, God used some content from there to really help shape my perspective and my interaction with people. So, and it was just that idea of being able to visit someone's position. Yeah. So I'm loving it. Shout out
It's
to
funny.
McDonald's.
It's funny in the content meeting too. You know that visual of the cylinder and the square came up. And the funny thing about that was everybody in the meeting was like, "Oh, that's a great picture of it." And when I started going, "Okay, I'm gonna get our graphic guy to recreate this to look at it," I was looking for a good one to send him, and I saw this other one that had the wedge in it and the triangle, and like I knew that everybody on the content was excited about it. I was like, if they were excited about that when they see this, they're gonna be like, "Oh, that's
like
so
next level."
Yeah, which was kind of a fun thing.
In terms of what I'm hearing,
I love that picture.
You know, I also moderate comments and watch every minute of every service on Sunday live, and I'm really impressed with our church and how people are responding. I've only seen positive stuff. I haven't, my fear, obviously, when I heard it that we were going to do it a few months ago, is that we're going to have some upset people, that you didn't take one side or you took too far the other side. And I feel like you've been an equal opportunity offender when you have used examples, and so that's helped. But I promised that I would be. Yeah, and you're sticking true to it. But I personally haven't had any really negative feedback come in, on social media, through email, Facebook, whatever. So that's also a blessing. Obviously, we got another week left, but it's been great. I think you've, shout out to you. I think you've done a really good job with it. And I'm actually surprisingly kind of bummed to hear that it's ending soon. So,
well, we're going to move on to bigger and better things.
Yeah.
But I would say that's mostly true for me.
Yeah.
I have received a few, just to be transparent, I've received a few negative comments, and I always learn from that. It's the point of the message from this last week. But I always read that stuff, and I this. I tell our team, like, hey, don't shield me from negative feedback or comments. Like, send it to me. I want to learn from that stuff. But it's mostly been centered on people's concern. And the interesting thing is some of the negative feedback I got before this past weekend was, hey, isn't bringing up all of this stuff sort of what's going to cause division? Mm-hmm. Like, aren't you focusing us on the wrong things, and aren't, by focusing on the political decision? And just to address that for a second, like, I thought I understood the concern, and I actually think it's a valid perspective. The thing is, though, everybody's talking about this anyway. And what I wanted was for people to have strategies to be thoughtful about this, as opposed to engaging the way everybody else is. Because it seems to me, and again, I have a limited perspective too, just like all of us. But as I look at the landscape of television media, social media, even in real life, like, almost every conversation I see is not really a conversation. It's two groups shouting at each other. Right. And it's like, we've got to learn how to have productive dialogue, to be thoughtful about this, and to represent our position. When I say our position, I don't mean like left or right. I mean our position as believers in the most effective way possible, whether we're talking to people on our side or on the other side of the aisle. Right. And so anyway, that was sort of, and the people, and again, I'm grateful for this. The people that were concerned that this would create division within our church. But I knew that was one of the things I wanted to address, to try to cause us not just to look up, but to rise up above the fray, I guess, for lack of a better term, and not get sucked down into the ugly. It's not even just social. It's Christian conflict on social media that, and the thing is we don't engage in so many of our listeners are so smart, like they know this. If we're not careful with the way we engage, we won't have a voice with people that we want to influence anyway. Right. I had a friend that told me about 2 weeks ago. He said, well, this is the season of purging Facebook for me. And I was like, what do you mean by that? He goes, like, it just, all these people that are sending me this junk from the other side, I just unfriend them. Like, they're just gone. Yeah. And it's like, I understood that, right, because I get tired of that too. But at the same time, I thought, like, how sad is that? Like, that's how we only listen to people that say things that we're saying that we already think. Yeah. And we never grow. We never gain new perspective. We're not challenged. And so,
you feel like that's kind of the problem, in that we live in such a unique time. We get to choose the news and the information that we receive. So like truly the idea of an echo chamber when we're all looking at our own, Facebook, Instagram, and like your friend, I mean, we've all been there, like,
Yep.
that's such a stupid thing. I'm going to, unsubscribe
Goodbye.
from that guy. We can craft, and actually the algorithms, this is way deep dive, but like the algorithms behind these technologies are also seeing what we're reading and feeding us more like it.
Yeah.
And so we truly, if we're not careful as individuals, we can completely be walking next to someone in life and have completely different perspectives on the world and form opinions about those people. Like,
well, and going back to the first week,
time.
that's how, and we don't recognize it, but the world's actually working against us in that way.
Yeah.
Because not only do they want our attention, they know who the people are that are looking for their message. And that's how, for lack of a better term, that's how they get paid.
Right.
Like that's how they stay in business. That's how they move their platforms and their technologies and their content forward, the likes so they're not even looking for people with differing opinions. Right. They only are trying to appeal to a certain group. And what happens is we all only pay attention to our echo chamber. And I just think that that's the sad reality of the days in which we live. And I think most of us don't realize that's exactly what's happening. So, I will say one other piece of feedback that I got, that honestly was probably the best compliment I could have received. Some of you are going to think this is odd and maybe you won't even like it. But one of the guys on our volunteer team was telling another guy on our staff after Sunday's message, he kind of hung around and he was waiting to, he could tell he was going to process some of the content. And the guy on our staff was worried, a little bit about the conversation. And one of the first things the guy said was that he was really grateful for the angle we've taken on this series, that it was so centered on Jesus, not center between left and right, but so centered on Jesus that he couldn't tell which way I lean politically, which that's because we all have biases. Right. We all have leanings. And one of the most difficult things for me is I'm not trying to rule out my convictions. What I'm trying to do is elevate the most important convictions. Right. And the ones that we all should share, the biblical perspective, the biblical convictions that we should all share, and trying to make those most central so that they can inform all of the left and right leaning perspectives that we have, because those are the ones that need to be lifted up so that they can primarily be the lens through which we look to inform and view those other things. And, who knows how successful we're being, but I thought that was one indication that we're doing what we set out to do. I told you in the beginning of this series, like if we're really not concerned about getting people to look left and right and really look up, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's off the table. There's a whole bunch of stuff we're not going to wade into because it actually draws us away from looking up. Yeah. It's looking down. It's looking at the earth. It's looking at the world. It's looking at things that are temporal as opposed to gaining perspective by what's eternal. So
that's what I loved about this, part of this last week's message too, is that, early on, months ago when I was afraid, I was like, gosh, like Joel has to thread this needle to be just, right in the middle between it. And it really is the difference between 2D and like 3D chess, because I felt like the distinction from this last Sunday was you clearly put a marker in the sand. It's like, we're not between the political leanings of this kingdom. What I'm saying is, and you point to Jesus and go, that's the kingdom that we're on the team of. Yeah. And I just love the picture of and just the idea that, this day and age, because everything is so polarized, because people are in their echo chambers, that's created a market vacuum, really, so to speak, for the church to stand in that space and go, okay, we're going to show you what unity looks like. We have people from, all different, shape, sizes, political leanings, all, backgrounds, everything else within our body. But look out, world, look out, America. We're going to show you what true unity looks like when we put Jesus first. And I felt that this last week. And I love that you got that piece of feedback from that volunteer, because that, that's a just one little, metric data point, that you're doing a good job at that. But I'm curious what, you talked from this last Sunday about you kind of gave us some application, listen, learn, love steps.
Yep.
What, if you could just push in more on that, like, what does that look like for you? What does that method of unity look like for you in this season personally, or even as a leader of this church? Like, what are some things that you're seeing that work in?
So I'm going to answer the question, but the context of the question is years ago, I had a really good friend confront me in a really bold way, and basically told me that I think I've told this maybe in a sermon before. This was when I was in seminary, and we were debating something, and I don't even remember what it was, but I was crushing him in this debate.
That's all that matters.
Which is why I wanted to dismiss what he was saying. But
Right.
he stopped in the middle, and it's a pretty good friend of mine. We're sitting at a Waffle House, actually, late at night. And he said, we were studying, and we got in this debate. He said, "You're the worst listener I've ever met in my entire life." And, like, I've been insulted by a lot of things, but, like that's not really a trophy anybody wants to win. And, like, it was, in the moment, just to be totally transparent, I was defensive. I told him that he was narcissistic and that, he couldn't, his position was wrong. He couldn't admit that he was wrong, and that's why he's lashing out against me, and yada, yada, yada. After a brief fraction in our friendship, it didn't last too long, I began to think about, and I actually talked with somebody else who was sort of a mentor of mine and said, listen to what happened. And the guy asked me, like, so what do you think any of that's his perspective. Yeah. What do you think that perspective is based on? And what he was basically saying was, like, is there any truth in that you could learn from? Is there anything in what he's saying that could be used as evidence against you, right, that you are actually the worst listener on the entire planet? And, like, I was like, you don't even know this guy. Why are you on his team? All of that's my first reaction. But then
proving his point.
Exactly. Proving his point. And then I started thinking, like, okay, you know what? Maybe there's something for me to learn from here. And I remember that being a mark, like, it caused me to go back to him and try and learn in a different way. And what happened for me, it wasn't like this lightning bolt enlightenment moment in my life, but I remember sitting down and trying my best to humbly approach him and go, hey, I don't want to be thought of that. Whether that's just your opinion or that's a lot of people's opinion, right, I'm still yet to figure out, but I don't want that to be anyone's opinion of me. So can you tell me, like, what from your perspective is why you would say that? And we had this really great conversation, and I wouldn't say we didn't agree, but so I say that because that sort of set me on, and even a little bit earlier, I made a choice that was unique. Even going to that seminary, like, I went to a seminary that wasn't the tradition I grew up in. And it was actually a very different theological tradition. And the reason I went there is because I already knew what I went to a Bible college. I already knew what I believed on this side, from this heritage, from what I grew up in. And this didn't seem totally crazy to me, but it seemed like they weren't necessarily right. Yeah. But I didn't have any evidence for that. And I thought, I know what I believe. I feel confident in my beliefs. I'm going to go learn over here and see how that can broaden or balance my beliefs. And believe it or not, I didn't go all the way over there. I finished from that school, and I don't know that they would claim me. It's one of those things. But then not only that, as this translated to leadership, and this is true of our board. Like, most people in our church don't really know this. We have a process of board selection where candidates are submitted, and the board selects candidates, and then interviews, and there's this whole process, and then brings people on the board, and the church confirms whether this should be the board for the next year or not. I take a very passive role in that, because I know that if people come on and agree with me, I'm going to want to be for them being on the board. And if they come on and they don't agree with me, I'm going to want to be against that. And so that the consequences of that, and I would say good consequences, we have people on our board that we don't see eye to eye. Right. And those are people I need to listen to. Mm-hmm. I need to sit in meetings where there's contrarians or people that see the world and have a perspective that's different than mine, because that's what helps me grow. I mean, the content meetings that we have, it's why you're in the meeting. You know this. Like when we talk about content and a lot of the stuff, oftentimes we have very different perspectives. And if you're not in the meeting, I don't know what I don't know.
Right.
And that's true of most of us in life, is we already know what we know. And so you asked me practically, what does this look like? And, in this season, I'm trying to be focused on listening to voices that are different than mine. Mm. And like, if people follow me closely and they go, oh, who's Joel following online? Or, who's Joel reading and all this stuff, like I'm reading a lot of things and I'm listening to a lot of people that have very different perspectives from me. And you could say, well, that opens you up. But the reality is when we do what we've been talking about in this series and we decide, okay, I'm going to listen to these people, but I'm going to look through the lens, not of my political persuasion. Right. I'm going to evaluate everything that's being said. I'm going to evaluate everything that's being communicated. I'm going to evaluate this position, this candidate, this platform, this philosophy, whatever it is, through the lens of my faith first as a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. Then we don't have to be worried about, somebody who differs from us politically and we're worried they're going to pull us away from our faith, because it's like, no. I've already placed the lens of my faith over it. And when you're in conflict with what I believe the truth of the scriptures are, well, then I'm not going to discount, but I'm going to try to understand why you're coming from that perspective. And then I'm going to apply what I know to be true to that perspective. So, that's sort of, how I'm trying to do that.
I've actually migrated a little bit, even in that, from the beginning of this season, of somebody could hear you say, I'm just trying to listen and visit other positions and try to hear other perspectives and learn through this time, and somebody could look at that and go, well, that's kind of vanilla, like that's kind of a cheap way out. But if you really think about it, and this is a little bit of my migration of thinking, is like, there is something radical about that. Like there's something, punk rock, like on the edge, like I'm going to try new things. I'm going to put myself at risk. I'm going to take my, my, what may be like closed hand beliefs about something and open it up a little bit and just like see what happens if I expose a new light to that stuff. And the more that I think about that, I go, that shouldn't be our first blush to go, oh, well, that's just, kind of playing both sides. Because it is radical. It is. It takes being vulnerable, and it takes being okay with being vulnerable, and just logically speaking, at the very least, by doing that, you've learned the other side's argument. So if anything, you've gotten ammunition to reinforce your own position. Yeah. But I have a feeling when people truly lean in and do that, and I'm sure you've experienced this, at the very least, you can begin to understand why somebody thinks that way. You may not agree with it, but at least and this is something my wife reminds me of, because I can be, a hothead about opinions sometimes, believe it or not. And she's great about reminding me. She's great about reminding me that, that person thinks that way because they have had a real life experience. They have a father, a mother, and they've grown up, and for whatever reason, their life experience has brought them to thinking that way. Yeah. And that helps put a human attribution instead of some, just.
Well, it just makes me think about, like, what you're saying is it's so much easier to be critical of somebody from afar. Yeah. Their position from afar, how they operate from afar. I remember the first time I went to a third world country, and I was super critical going into, like, why do these people live this way? Why do they operate this way? Because we were learning, sort of if you've ever been on a mission trip, oftentimes there's some prep work ahead. Like we need you as Americans to know that things operate differently here. And here's how you sort of have to operate to be effective in what we're trying to do. So the thing is you get there and you sort of get immersed in the culture. And I think this is the epitome of visiting someone's position. And what happens? You learn. You start to go, oh, I understand why they operate this way. Like from my American view with our political system, our social system, like it seems crazy that you would operate that way. Right. It seems crazy that somebody would say, don't do this or do this. But now that I'm here, I realize, oh,
makes sense.
It makes sense, and my wife and I, before coming to mission, we were engaged, not far from actually where our partner is in Malawi. We were engaged with an organization that was doing some very unique work in Africa, and it was very different than what other organizations were doing. A lot of organizations that were doing, orphanages and having sponsored children. And when they explained to us how that system actually continues to hold those kids back and in poverty, and they explained how much harder and more expensive, but more effective their approach was by us immersing in their position. Like, 'cause at first I thought, why are they doing this? Like,
Right.
everybody else does it this way. And I realized, like, oh gosh, like, I understood from a different perspective that I didn't have or I couldn't have had as an American.
Yeah.
And I think that's true. We people do that all the time. And it's why study abroad programs exist.
Right.
It's like, I can learn something. I can be more effective at learning European history in Europe.
Right. Right.
Like, I actually, instead of getting an American's version of European history, I actually get European history from Europeans.
Yeah.
Like, it's their history. So I think that's the power of it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I did see, just to kind of bring it home and wrap it all up and get to the big question. This one came up at the end of it was in the Facebook comments at the end of the first week. Somebody's like, "This is great message, but just tell me who to vote for already." Like, okay, Joel, this is awesome. Thank you for that. But who are you voting for? I know you're not going to answer that question, but maybe talk a little bit about, like, when it comes time to vote, like, how do we even begin to practically apply any of it?
Which I'm flattered by that, by the way. And I love that somebody said that, but they actually don't really they want me to tell them who to vote for until I disagree with them.
That's right.
Like, so I'm not even sure that would be effective, but to your point, I get this a lot too, like, who are you voting for and why? And, in fact, you told me about a Facebook comment where their application from Sunday was that.
Yeah.
It was, they were on our stream and they posted on social media, "Hey, who are you voting for and why? I'm trying to listen and learn," which maybe isn't the most effective way to do that, but I applaud that.
Yeah.
Like, for somebody to go, "Hey, I'm looking for people who disagree with me, and I want your opinion. I want to know why, because I want to listen and I want to learn. I want to broaden." So I love that. Practically for me, how I do this is, let me take it to incredibly practical, because a lot of people don't know this, and you're going to be really smart. Do you know that we're actually voting for our mayor on August 4th?
I actually did know that.
So most people think it's November 3rd.
Yeah.
So there is a general election scheduled for November 3rd.
Right.
However, if on August 4th in the primary, if one of the three current candidates, actually I think there's four, there's three and then there's a write-in candidate. If one of the four current candidates gets the majority of the vote, so the majority of, not of the town, but the majority of legal voters who vote. Right. So let's say 1,000 people show up for the primary. Those 1,000 people may determine who our mayor is, because if 501 of them vote for one candidate, there's no general election in November. So most people don't realize that. So maybe I just inspired you into looking at this. But so here's what I've been doing. There's I think there's 12 candidates for council members, and there's 3 seats available. 2 of them are 4-year seats. One of them is somebody stepped out, so there's a 2-year seat available. So there's 3 council seats available, and the mayor. And so what I've been trying to do is, and the funny thing is, interestingly, almost all of the candidates have identified as nonpartisan. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Nobody's identified as Republican or Democrat. It's because of the season we're in. I think there's maybe 1 or 2 of the council members, but all of those running for mayor are all nonpartisan.
Yeah.
And they don't say independent. They don't say libertarian. They just nonpartisan. And so for me, I've not only engaged people that I respect in the community that know some of these people or have insight into their involvement in the community. Certainly I want to know that, whether I think they agree with me or not. If they have proximity to these people, right. I want to know what their perspective is. I've been reading online. Most all of them have like, here's what I'm for, here's what my policies are, here's what I want to do, here's what I want to accomplish. So I'm trying to look at that and find out as much information as I can on that. And then I'm actually trying to, and I won't tell you who this is, but I'm trying to, there's one of these candidates that's popular, and they're not my natural person that I would choose. And so I'm trying to listen the most to the people that are for that candidate. Because I'm trying to figure out, like, why. If there's a large number of people, and let's just be honest, like, you may think they're crazy, but half of how many people in America now? 350 million, something like that. Half of 350 million people are for, roughly, depending on whether you believe the primary polls right now. But roughly half are for one candidate, half are for the other. I mean, half of a nation isn't crazy. Like, when you get that many people that are, and again, I realize primarily it's because of the parties that we have. However, in the culture today that we're in, so many people, like these candidates, are identifying as nonpartisan, yet they're still for one candidate or another. Right. And so I'll just say this. For me, I've been trying to seek out and listen and read people who are endorsing. So there's people so almost all these candidates have people that endorse them. So who are those people that are endorsing those candidates? I want to go read, what do those people have to say about these candidates and why are they endorsing them? All of that, though, for me, I'm going to look through the lens of my faith to determine. And again, I don't want to spoiler alert this weekend, but I will say I've seen the content and I am biased, but in a different direction. But I think this weekend is going to be the best part of the series. And I'm not preaching it. Steve Carter's preaching it. So, but the content is so good, and I don't want to scoop his content, but one of the points that Steve's going to make is, we're on foreign soil. As citizens of the kingdom of heaven, we are on foreign soil as representatives of the kingdom of heaven. We talked about in the first series, but this whole idea of being on foreign soil is so important. So as I remember that I'm a representative of the kingdom of heaven and the values and the agenda and the purpose and the goals of the kingdom of heaven, which one of these candidates best represents someone or a platform that allows me as a representative of the kingdom of heaven to further the agenda of the kingdom of heaven? Now you can say, okay, so are you some sort of spy? But to some degree, this is, Steve's going to talk about this a little bit too. This is sort of the colonization idea. Right. If you go way back, it's like, and this is going to feel super anti-American, but I'm going to say it anyway.
It's okay. You're wearing the shirt.
When I'm wearing the shirt. Don't forget, I'm wearing the shirt.
Wearing the shirt.
When the British colonized what is now the United States of America, and it was the British colonies, you had representatives who were there, who were representing the colonies. They were elected by people in the colonies to represent people in the colonies, but ultimately their allegiance was to the British, to King George. That changed over time, and it became allegiance to the people they represented rather than their ultimate authority in the British Empire. Now, you can say it's a terrible analogy, but if we allow that to happen, and it's like, okay, no, I'm going to use my vote, I'm going to use my leverage, I'm going to use my power, I'm going to use my position to represent the people. Right? It sounds good. To represent the citizens of the United States of America, to represent the citizens of Gilbert, then you're actually not operating primarily as a representative of the kingdom of heaven. You don't have to be against those people, but it's the same with the British. At some point, all of those politicians, those leaders, they decided they were no longer going to be loyal to King George, to the person who was their king, and they were going to elect a new king. And it may seem like an anti-American analogy, but I think that's where we live. Yeah. That's the time and history we live in. We're on foreign soil here in America, we think of ourselves primarily as Americans, but we're in foreign soil as citizens of the kingdom of heaven. For much more of our eternity, we're going to spend in heaven than we are going to spend here in America, in the United States of America. And the question is, how do we operate in such a way that we don't get kicked out? We don't lose our influence. Right. But we actually, because the difference between, and every analogy breaks down somewhere, but the difference between the British and the kingdom of heaven is that the British, the United Kingdom, and as it's known, the British were reigning in tyranny over the people. But we have a just and good and loving and sovereign God who doesn't want to reign in tyranny. He could if he chose to.
And he wants what's best.
And he wants what's best for us. And so as representatives of him and that kingdom to want what's best. Yeah. See, that was the problem. The British Empire no longer listened to the people of the colonies and wanted what was best for them. And so they rebelled and they wanted out. My question is, if we're poor representations of the kingdom of heaven as citizens of the kingdom of heaven, everybody's going to want out.
That's so good. That I feel like, we have to ask the question, who are you voting for? Because it's good for clickbait. So if you got here because you saw us post somewhere, Joel answers the question, who are you voting for? Welcome. But it really does help frame that question for everyone in a way that is unique to them as a Christian, but it kind of helps. It really forces you to answer in terms of priority and how I see the world. Is my politics as an American citizen, or does my position as a follower of Christ and a child of the living God determine? And like you said, I think week one, sometimes those things are in conflict.
Yeah, they are, and often
they should be. So I feel like that's
they often in conflict, thing. And we don't often acknowledge it.
Right. Or we try to shoeghorn.
We try to shoehorn
one into the
other.
That's
we try to formulate a version of our faith that supports our politics. Here, I'll just say this last thing, and then I know we need to wrap up. And this is probably pushing a little bit too far. If you stayed to the end, you're mature enough to receive this. We don't vote this way. We don't vote based on representatives of the as citizens of the kingdom of heaven. Mm-hmm. Some of us think we do, but in the end, what it comes down to is my safety, the people I love, my financial security, my heritage, my side. And the reason I say that is because I think Christians are guilty of identifying more with what's going to put me ahead and protect me and benefit me now in this world than what's actually going to further the agenda of the kingdom of heaven.
So good.
And I think all I'm hoping for in this series is that we as a community would be a bit more thoughtful, and we would approach it from a third party, from a third perspective, from a third position that says, no, I'm not a representative of the left. I'm not a representative of the right. I'm a representative of the kingdom of heaven. And I need to vote based on being an ambassador for that kingdom, which is what we're going to talk about this weekend. So stay tuned. Yeah. This weekend's going to be awesome. You do not want to miss it. It'll be a great opportunity to share with other people.
I feel like we don't end now. You're going to just go ahead and preach Steve's message.
I know. I'm excited about it. And he'll do a better job than I would. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Joel. Thank you for tuning in. And like I said, if you have any thoughts, feedback, just drop those in the comments below or contact us. And look forward to seeing you next week.